Oh, less than a minute to go.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to put wallpaper on the ceiling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we will deal with the DIY discussions later, but it's 7 o'clock, so we need to dive in. All right. Thank you everybody for coming back. We are picking up right where we left off in a fascinating little verbal play. We are right down at the bottom of the screen. We're on page 42 of Lev Shalem. We are right at the transition where we finish the Shema and its paragraphs and go back into the brachot, the blessings that we had been doing. Remember, two right before the Shema, Shema plus its paragraphs, and then we're launching back into the blessings afterwards. But to mark that, we're going to make a little blending. Right down at the bottom, you will, oh, sorry, let me just get my Zoom pinned again. Just a second, there we go. Right down at the bottom, you'll notice that the final three words were Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am Adonai, your God. But through very clever wordplay, the rabbis recognize that if you take the next word, the first word rather, of the next blessing, emet, and you put it after the last two words of that other phrase, it becomes a whole new sentence. Adonai Elohechem emet. Adonai, your God, is truth. So it's one of those great ways that Hebrew works, especially when we're not playing around with the verb to be, is our were. You can get a lot more flexibility in your poetic structure. It's one of the perks of Hebrew. Now, this has another knock-on effect that I just want to mention tangentially. If you turn back to page 41, you'll notice way up in the italics at the very top in the instructional block that nobody ever seems to read, it mentions that if you are reading this without a minyan, that it is often customary to add the words El Melech Ne'eman. God is a faithful sovereign. Now, the reason why that is added without a minyan is because at the bottom of our page, if you're davening without a minyan, you don't do those final three words. And they want to keep the total number of words consistent because with them, it adds up to 248, which is a very important word in Jewish numerology because that's considered to be the number of positive commandments. 365 negative, 248 positive. Also, 248 is idealistically considered to be the number of parts of your body. So it's like saying, I am doing this with all of my body, which is kind of what the Ve'ahavta said. All your heart, with all your soul, with all your self. So keeping the word count even is kind of fun. But there is a more original reason of why they did this. It's because if the leader was to finish with Ani Adonai Elohechem, it might sound a little presumptuous. I am the Lord your God. Well, yes, I'm quoting, but at the moment it sounds like I'm referring to myself, and no one should ever think of themselves as being God. So by moving it over one, adding the word from the next blessing, it becomes Adonai, your God is true. Now I'm no longer making a potentially blasphemous statement about my own godhood. So the rollover works very well for a number of different reasons. And if we are on Friday night, we have to go back into our melodies. Remember our that nusach block, and we'll finish off with Adonai Elohechem Emet, and we'll go right into our next blessing into usually private prayer. We'll go slide right into it, which means that from Ve'ahavta from Shema, Ve'ahavta, and the other paragraphs into this blessing, it is one smooth run all the way through. There's no sharp interruption. Okay, enough of the transition, because there's actual content here, which is even more important, and that needs to be. I never find a good place for it. So we are now moving into our third blessing of the evening. First one was about creation, about light, about dark, the changing of seasons. The second one was about revelation, God's loving gift of Torah and instruction. And our third our third blessing, which comes right after the Shema detour, where we talk about our love for God, is Ga'al Yisrael, where we talk about God's redemptive power. Now, how do we do this? Well, Judaism is a very concrete poetry. It's a very earthy reflection. We're not talking about God redeeming us from this world to the world beyond. We believe in an afterlife, but that's not the goal of this blessing. We're talking about God making this world better. And we bring proof. Right? We bring something to the table to say, yeah, there's a reason we believe this rather than merely hope. And that is because God's done it before. We've got a past record to take a look at. Redemption means freedom from suffering in this world. And if we look back at the Exodus, that's a pretty good template of what we're talking about. We were slaves, and now we are free. And that is what redemption means. Not only the end of slavery, of course, but as an example of going from a time of suffering to a time where we are released from that suffering, that we can enjoy the beauty of this world, all of its fruits and all of its forms without that pain, that fear, the terrors. That's what we mean by a redeemed world. That's what we are looking for when we're talking about redemption. And that past performance is very important in Jewish belief. Now, some of you may have questions about the full historicity of the Exodus that really happened and looked the way the Sisubita Mill did it. All of that is a whole great set of questions that we're not going to cover today, but I'd like to give you a broader kavanah, which is the very fact that we are still here, despite all the things that are happening. We're sitting here comfortably and air-conditioned. Thank God. Library in Central Florida is already indicative of God's redeeming power. Because as we have just commemorated Tisha B'Av and we have recounted so many of the tragedies that happened just on that one day, other events in our calendar, the only reason we are having Tisha B'Av is because we're still here to recount all of those tragedies, meaning that we were redeemed from all of the things that laid low other peoples and other empires throughout history, that we have seen an end to each of those phases of suffering, and we have come out in better positions time and time again. So redemption is not a hypothetical, it is not ethereal, and it is certainly not transcendental off in another world. We believe this world is what needs to be redeemed, and we have experienced it in incomplete measure all the way up to this point, or else we wouldn't be here. And how do we know? And how do we know that this will happen? Well, really, what we've gotten now as the formula that we began with is redemption is the result of Judaism. You have creation, and you have revelation, you have an understanding of how to live in it, and you combine that together with God's love for us and our loves for God. What comes out the other side? Bada bing, bada boom, redemption.
Fall for redemption?
Don't you need what?
Fall to be redeemed?
Well, you don't need to fall, you just need to be suffering. And we suffer because we live in a material world that we approach with inadequate guidance, with inadequate choices. And that doesn't mean that we have fallen per se, because that's a very loaded term in modern Western thought. It just means that this world at the moment is not yet the perfect world that it could be. And it more or less started off that way. And we are working our way up, at least if we do things right. And we're holding steady if we do things mediocre. And we take a lot of steps back into suffering if we mess things up. But ultimately, we have faith that through our efforts and everyone else's, we will get there. God does have a plan for the world as a whole to be redeemed at some point. All right, so let's take a look at how we describe this in a little bit more detail. Let's see if I can put my box somewhere that it won't distract me. Okay, so the text itself begins, Emet ve'emuna kol zot v'kayam aleinu. True and faithful is all of this, which again is referring both to what we just read, our description of God that we did through Ve'ahavta, and all of the paragraphs that go along with it, and it is also introducing what is about to come. So we're both saying what we just read is true and certain, and what you are about to read is true and certain. And thank you for reminding me by looking at the page numbers. We're on page 43, 43A if you are in our copy, because there's a 43B alternative version, but we're sticking with the more classic. V'kayam aleinu, and it's established for us. What is this true and faithful teaching? Ki hu Adonai Elohim v'ein zulato, that he is Adonai our God, and there is none beside him, right? There's only one God. V'anachu Yisrael amo, and we are Israel, his people. Apodenu miyad melachim, and he is the one who liberated us from the hand of kings. Malkenu v'goalenu mikaf kol haaretz, and he is our king, not like those bad kings that were oppressing us. We've got a good king, meaning God, and God redeemed us from the hand of these tyrants, of these people who cause suffering. Ha'el nifra lanu mitzarenu, he is the God, or the Almighty, who exacts payment on our behalf from our oppressors, those that call us tausus surus, to use the Yiddish. Amshat, you okay?
Yeah.
Keeping up? Mitzarenu? We haven't had actually the word aretz yet. It's the word is mitzarenu, which sounds very similar to aretz, but it is the mitzarenu are translated here as oppressors, those that cause suffering. Just a second, let me come around. We are mitzarenu is right there, down the line. There we go, and that is being translated here as just retribution upon all our mortal enemies. The word earthly is not actually, that's just the word for melon. So, as we've talked about before, translations are always combating how literal they should be to the original Hebrew and how expressive should they be of the intent of the original Hebrew. And Lev Shalem has to try and do that balancing. I'm trying to give you a little bit more literalness just so that eventually, maybe if you watch this enough, you can begin to read the Hebrew and have a sense of it. But by all means,
makes sense.
What's that?
That translation makes sense
My translation makes sense?
compared to the Hebrew.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, it is hard to try and capture everything the Hebrew is trying to say. So we're sticking with the semi-literal just because I want people to learn a little Hebrew in the process. Yeah.
Is Mitzrayim, is that a play on Mitzrayim, Egypt?
It's the other way around, right? So Mitzrayim is often played as being the narrow place because it was a place of our oppression. But of course, anybody who's ever looked at a map of Egypt, a population, will also recognize it's a very narrow habitable zone. Look at a picture of a satellite. You can see the green right along the sides of the Nile. Look at pictures of the night sky with all of the lights. Again, right up the Nile. So it is also a narrow place in that sense. Yes, but yeah, there is assonance between the words. They are definitely have a shared feeling. Okay. Yes. Hamishalem Gemul lechol oivei nafshenu, and he brings retribution on all those who are the enemies of our souls, or the enemy of our being. Nefesh is not just soul in the modern Western sense, it's also like our whole self. Okay, now, so far, you're probably thinking, man, this sounds a little bloodthirsty, right? God is bringing down the hammer on our enemies. Well, our enemies are being reflected here not just as like the people we don't like. These are people who don't like God. That's why they are oppressing us. They are not willing to respect the fact that God wants to have peace and justice in the world. And so they are attacking other nations around them, including us. And when we are saying they will be overthrown, that they will be given their just deserts, we are saying that that type of attitude, the brutality of the ancient empires, and unfortunately still some modern countries, will eventually be swept away. That is not normal, and it is not acceptable. That is not God saying, hey, you know, the world is a dog-eat-dog place, just deal with it. God is saying, yeah, it's wrong, and eventually this will stop. And again, that is a radical claim, and especially in the ancient world where many people just took it as normal, that was the way the world was built and the gods like a winner. But that wasn't the Jewish concept. And God does great things that have that are beyond comprehension. V'niflaot ad ein mispar. He does wonders that are without number. We can't even count them. Asam nafshenu b'chayim. He sustains our soul and life. That is one of our wonders. We're still alive, not just from all the disasters talking about, but being alive at any point is a wonder, a miracle. How did this blob of inanimate material have consciousness and life? It's kind of unusual. We haven't found anything else in the solar system yet that even comes close to life. Who knows whether there's anything else out there? V'lo natan lamot ragleinu. And he does not then allow our feet to slip. Yes, there may be problems, but our path forward will continue. Ragleinu. Amadritenu al bamot oivenu, and he will lead us up onto to walk upon the high places of our enemies, meaning their sites of idolatrous shrine or their sites of their forts that would lord over us. And by walking on them, it's showing that we have defeated them. Vayarim karnenu al kol sonenu, and he will lift our horn over all that hate us. Sonenu very literally meaning those that hate, not just people that we have a beef with, but people that actually hate. And again, that idiom that we saw before in the Psalms of lifting up our horn, this was a sign of triumph, a sign of victory, the way that a bull would raise its head as a symbol of its power and its strength. Like I said, the poetry is very earthy. It is based upon the land and the animals around the people at the time. Lift our horns, there's also right. Ha'aselanu nisim nekama b'paro, and he performed miracles for us, and he had vengeance against Pharaoh. We are now getting into the specific of when we saw a lot of this happen. Otot umoftim, signs and portents be'admat b'nei Ham, in the land of the children of Ham. Ham was one of Noah's sons, and he was the son that ended up settling in the territory that would eventually become Egypt. So that's why we're referring to him here. Hamakeh be'evrato kol bechorei Mitzrayim, and he struck with his wrath, with his anger, all of the firstborn of Egypt. V'yotze et amo Yisrael mikafam, and he took out Israel from among them, lecherut olam, for an eternal freedom or everlasting freedom. Hama'avir banav bein gizrei Yam-Suf, and he caused his children to pass through the walls of the Sea of Reeds, meaning the Exodus through the parting of the sea. Et rodfenu ve'et sonehem, et rodfehem ve'et sonehem bitmot tiba, and their pursuers, meaning the ones chasing after us, Pharaoh and his army, and their haters, meaning Pharaoh and his army, we are the they in this pronoun, into the depths he drowned. V'ra'u vanav vuoto, and thus his children saw his might. Shibchu v'hodu lishmo, and they praised and they gave thanks to his name. Umalchuto v'ratzon, and his sovereignty they willingly kiblu alehem, accepted upon themselves. We said, yep, you know what? The force that's doing this right now, that is king, right? Not Pharaoh, not any other, but what's causing this to happen. That is what we are accepting as being our true king. On themselves, Moshe uvenei Yisrael, and thus Moses and the children of Israel. And in our modern Lev Shalem, you'll see that we also have the word Miriam. We're on page 444 at this point. Lecha anushira, to you they sang, B'simcha rabba ve'amru fulam. They sang with great joy, and everybody said, and then ... Okay. So what did everybody say? That is our next page. Now we're on page 444, beginning at the bold Hebrew. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh. Who is like you among the mighty of Adonai? This is a rhetorical question. The answer is no one. Who is like you awesome in holiness or adorned in holiness, Nora tehilot, and awesome in praise, Osei Pele, doing wonders, maker of wonders. This is, of course, a line taken out of Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, that is recorded back in the book of Exodus. Yeah, question or comment? Pele, yes. A wonder or a miracle, another type of miracle. Yeah, not somebody that you meet at the bar, some fellow. Got to watch out for that fellow. And then we carry on. Malchutecha ra'uvancha, and your children saw your sovereignty. Bokeayam lifnei Moshe, when you divided the sea before Moses, and thus ze'eli anu ve'amru. And then they exclaimed, "This is my God, that which is making this happen. This is what we mean by God." And again, all of this is the pointing not just at our victory, but at the removal of that suffering, the removal of that pain, the end of human tyranny. That which fights against that is what they are recognizing as God. Adonai himloch leolam ba'ed, and thus may Adonai please reign forever and ever. We want this forever. That is the goal. This kind of world where the wicked do not triumph over the good, and where good people are able to escape the pain caused by others. That's what we want from our kingdom. When we talk about the kingdom of God, that's what we mean. The Ne'emar, as it is said, Ifada Adonai et Yaakov, because Adonai liberated Jacob, Ugalo, and redeemed him, Miyad Chazak Mimin, from a hand that was mightier than his, meaning mightier than Jacob's. So we were in some other, the hand of Pharaoh, we were gripped, and God pulled open Pharaoh's hand and rescued us from it. To be in someone else's hand is a biblical idiom for being under their power. And God took us out. They had 100% of the power, and yet God broke that and brought us out. Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Therefore, blessed are you, Adonai, who has redeemed Israel. All right, now we got to do a little melody work. So we back up a page. Oh, that's the wrong way. We back up a page to 43A. Sorry, I forgot. This book, 44, will do us fine. But if you're on my slide, we're backslide here until third line from the bottom, second line from the end, Umalchuta. And we are going to go back to our same Nusach melody, like we did for Uma Avir Yom. Pam 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 ba ba pam pam. That's the flavor we're going to get. So when we get to the bottom, I'm going to flip the page, but you guys are already on page 44 in the Siddur. You're good. Umalchuto b'ratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe uMiriam u'vnei Yisrael lecha'anu shira v'simcha rabah v'amru kulam mi chamocha b'elim Adonai mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot Osei Pele, Malchutecha ra'uvanecha, Bokeayam lifnei Moshe, Ze'eli anu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, V'ne'emar, Ifada Adonai et Yaakov, Ugalo miyad chazak mimenu, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. And just, notice the way the melody repeats. Ma'avir yo, malchuto, avtecha. That's the standard intro paragraph. Then Ne'emar is another bridge kind of melody. So the melody is composed of all of these elements. And then when you are leading or praying for yourself, you have some flexibility of how you want to express it. Beneath Amocha, right? So yes, this is one where the different holidays will often override. Right now we're doing Friday night service melody, but if you were doing this for For a regular weekday, like, just Tuesday night, I need to get myself in the right mode. Go back to our start, right? We could just do a quick example. ומלכות טוב רצון קיבלו עליהם, משה ובני שבחנו שירה, שמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות, נעשה פלא. And again, when you learn more of those, it helps you appreciate the differences for the different parts of the week or the different parts of the year. And yes, you can do this also to the High Holiday melody. Mi kamocha b'helim Adonai, mi kamocha nega b'kodesh, nora tehilo oseh pele. You can do it to that melody as well when it is High Holiday time. So yeah, the different opportunities give us different ways to express. All right, moving on to the second blessing after the Shema. We are on page 45 in Lev Shalem, and this is known as the Hashkivenu, creatively titled so because that's the first word of prayer. I tell you, we're great at our prayers. We just didn't know that we needed titles. Like that kid who turned in the poem, and then the teacher said, "So what's the title?" And the kid just went, "I didn't know we needed a title," and just copied the first one. That's what we have done. So the Hashkivenu is unusual because normally we do 2 blessings, Shema and its paragraphs, 1 blessing, and we're done. And then comes the night, and we go, night. I know we just talked about this in Ma'ariv Rabbi, and we talked about night being a normal part of creation, and night being perfectly fine, and dark is evil, dark is just a part of creation, and it's no worse, no better than light. But at night, I do get scared. Right? No matter how much I tell myself that it's part of creation, at night we do have additional worries and fears. Right? In the morning, we are getting up, we are heading out into the work. Yeah, we may be a little bit anxious, but the light is all around us, shining here in Florida a little too brightly or hot, and we get down to things. And then at night, we get ready for bed, where this would all be done near the very end of the day. And we know that as soon as our head hits that pillow, all of those worries, all of those doubts, all of those fears are going to just come creeping into our head. So the Hashkivenu is sort of an inoculation to remind us that God is with us while we are sleeping, that God is there protecting us, and that we will wake up in the morning. And so it gives us that additional strength that we need at nighttime. And again, it's not because the dark is bad. It's just because we as humans tend to be plagued by our worries more at nighttime than at other times. And as you can see, we have that. Okay. I'll check it out. Thanks. And within the Hashkivenu, the poetry is very comforting. It uses the imagery of God's sheltering wings, that God has a body. But anybody who has spent time around poultry will know that mother birds will shelter their chicks under the wings. And that imagery for our ancestors was a very powerful image of protectiveness. And so that gets used there. And then, of course, we also refer to God's sukkah. It gets repeated throughout this prayer that we are being protected by God's sukkah. It might sound a little strange, right? That sukkah is not a very protective structure by design. It's kind of flimsy and lets rain in. But that sometimes is what we must expect, must look for. Right? We don't need to feel protected only when we're inside the giant bunker. We can feel protected even in a sukkah if it is God's sukkah, if it is God's. So that is meant to reframe in our mind what we're looking for in our state of peace, that our state of peace is not everything has been sealed in concrete blocks with metal doors, but our state of peace comes from that understanding of living with God, even when things seem a little rickety. Okay, so let's get into the Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, right? Adonai, our God, lay us down in peace, right? Put us to bed. V'ha'amidenu malkeinu l'chayim, and then raise us up, our ruler, our king, to life, right? So we're going to go to bed, and do that in peace. And then in the morning, we should still be alive. This is the dream. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, and spread over us your sukkah of peace. V'taknenu b'etzah tova l'fnecha, guide us with your good counsel. V'hoshienu lema'an shemecha, and save us for the sake of your name. Touched on before, when we say the sake of God's name, we don't mean God's reputation. We mean because Yud He Vav He, God's essential name, in essence, is dedicated towards the saving, the redemption, the betterment of creation. That's why God built it in the first place. So when we say that it's because of God's name, it's as if we were saying it's in God's nature to provide this, and that's what we are reminding ourselves of. Notice that our protection doesn't just come from this ethereal shelter. It comes also in the form of guidance and counsel, that we make the right choices, which goes a long way to remove many of the bad things in V'hagem be'adenu, v'haser me'aleinu, and shield us and remove from us oyer, dever, herod, v'ra'av, v'yago, our enemies, our illness, sword, famine, and sorrow. That is a list of the sort of greatest hits of the things that we are afraid of. And we are saying, no more, please. Right? If we could just have all of those removed, we would really appreciate it. V'haser satan milfanenu me'acharenu, and remove the adversary from in front of us and from behind us. Okay, a little bit of a digression on Satan, not a theology class, but Satan in English usually gets pronounced Satan. And it's a Hebrew word, however, that is a job description, adversary. When we talk about Satan in Hebrew, we are talking about imagining the angelic courtroom, and God is sitting there in the seat of the judge, and the angels are arguing about what should happen to us. Satan is the prosecuting attorney saying, throw the book at him, God, got to be tough on crime. Have you seen what those humans have been doing? Those no goodniks down there ruining your earth. They don't treat each other right. They don't treat you right. They don't follow your commandments. Punish them, punish them, punish them. That is our adversary. Strict justice. Give them what they deserve, God. No compassion, no leniency, no mercy, no time off for rehabilitation. Just nail them to the wall. Well, that's not God's enemy. That's our enemy. Because our enemy is strict justice. Because as we say, if God held anybody accountable for any of their mistakes immediately, who could stand before God? We all make mistakes, and we need God's compassion. We need God's patience. We need God's mercy. So, please, God, give us a little bit of a break. Do not punish us because of our mistakes the way Satan wants us to be punished. Instead, we will do better. We will, try harder. But don't let our guilt catch up to us while we're asleep and have something bad happen to us. All of those anxieties of, why did I do what I did today? Why did I say what I said? All of those self-doubts and anxieties, all of that is part of that internal Satan, that internal adversary that tears us down, for many people when they are trying to put their head down to rest. And we're saying, take that and just push it aside. Let me sleep in peace. Let me recognize tomorrow will be a new day. If I made mistakes, I can fix them. I do not have to be burdened by guilt and shame.
But remember, when we first used to punish Job, he doesn't accuse him for the mistakes he made.
Mm-hmm.
He said if he were to be cruel to him, he would make.
If you were to allow cruelty to overtake him, yes, more, maybe a little bit more precise.
Family,
Mm-hmm.
he would make mistakes that didn't have to be said cruelty attack his body.
Yep. And Satan was right. But Satan was also wrong, because Job did not completely run away from God. He just thought it wasn't fair. And he was right about that. But the book of Job is a whole nother class. One that is a long time coming, because usually people read that book and they get very much the wrong understanding. Okay, anyway, take the Satan, yes. Uvitzel kenafecha tastirenu, and shelter us within the shadow of your wings. Ki el shomrenu umatzilenu ata. Because you are a God who protects us and who rescues us. Ki el melech hanun verachum ata. Because you are a God that is king, and you are gracious and merciful. I left out the word king over there for my translation. Sorry about that. Ushmor tzitenu uvoenu, and you guard our coming and our going. L'chaim l'shalom, for life and for peace. Me'ata v'yad olam, from now and forever. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Therefore, again, we return to this phrase: spread over us the sukkah of your peace. Baruch atah Adonai, aporei sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. Therefore, blessed are you, Adonai, who spreads the sukkah of peace over us, over all of his people, Israel, and over Jerusalem. That is a slightly longer version on Shabbat than we do on a weekday for our final prayer, but the essence is roughly the same. Now, oftentimes we will do this in English here at TI, because I find that for many people, this is often the part they need to comprehend the most. Sometimes we'll do it in the Hebrew, just with the straight nusach. Hashkiveinu Adonai Eloheinu Shalom. I'm on the wrong nusach. I think I did the weekday thing. Hashkiveinu Adonai Eloheinu Shalom. V'hamedenu makenu l'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. And so on through. And again, you can improvise off that melody theme to your heart's content, or just read it as we just did, or do the English, or use one of the billion Hashkiveinu melodies. I haven't found one that is all the way through, but there are many Hashkiveinu songs that take lines out of it and turn them into beautiful reflections.
Secondly, this prayer was done after exile. How can you say peace over you? With that.
Well, I mean, it was formalized. You might say after exile. The rabbis believed that these prayers were originally codified and probably were in essence during the time after the destruction of the first temple and during the rebuilding of the second temple. That was when this was first codified as the themes of the particular wording. We don't have existing texts that go back prior to the destruction of the second temple. But the themes we're fairly confident were already being shared among the Jewish community for all of these prayers. So it's hard to make arguments too precisely about this or that, but saying that we want peace over Jerusalem is appropriate whether Jerusalem is in our control or whether we are in exile and Jerusalem is under the control of someone else. We always want Jerusalem to be truly with shalom, which means that it should be a center of peace for us and for everyone else. So it is a universal appeal, regardless of the geopolitical situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is that a universal acceptance of it, or is that?
Well, ultimate peace for Jerusalem is not merely having a really good defense system. Ultimate peace for Jerusalem means it is no longer a source of strife. And that's our view of peace in general. Right? Judaism, Jews, Israel can't have peace if the world doesn't have peace. We can have better situations, and certainly right now, we need a lot better situation. But ultimate capital P peace only comes when it's universal. Because as long as there is strife and struggle elsewhere, that will spill over to affect even people living in the safest country in the world, which God willing should be Israel, and hopefully us in the US as well, but we know we're not there yet. All right, onward before we get down that rabbit hole too much. We then continue with Vishamru as a special reflection. Again, you can see the evening service here is giving us a little extra text to work with. And Vishamru is a quote actually taken from Exodus 30. And we'll see that it's got a nice melody that goes with it. But why are we all of a sudden reading this quote? Well, because it's reminding us that the day itself, Shabbat, is a sign of the covenant. The fact that there is Shabbat and the fact that we follow Shabbat re-ratifies that time, that covenant each week. It is as though we are saying, I do, the Jewish wedding symbol, but that's like saying I do again each week when you come to this point and saying, yep, every time I am there for Shabbat, I am saying I am Jewish, I am part of the covenant, I am part of our people, I am part of what God wants me to do. And each week I am reaffirming, it's probably a better word than re-ratify. So that Vishamru is a very powerful moment. It also reminds us, at least midrashically, that we are given an extra soul, an extra nefesh on this day. And I'll point that out when we get to the translation. And that's taken from a teaching in the Talmud. The citation is there. And I also wanted to leave with on Vishamru with a quote from Ahad Ha'am, one of the great early literary masters of the modern state of Israel, who wrote, "More than Jews have kept Shabbat," making a play off the word shamor, that we are keeping the Shabbat, and which is the same root as Vishamru. Shabbat has kept the Jews. That word doesn't just mean observe, it also means protect. If it weren't for her returning their soul and renewing their spiritual life every week, that is to say, if we didn't have Shabbat to give us that shot in the arm to help us each week, then spiritual life every week, the hardships of the days of action, meaning all the days when we are engaged in our work, would have pulled them down more and more until they would have finally descended into the last day of cruelty and moral and intellectual depravity. So even though he was a secularist, he recognized that Shabbat as a feature of the week was an essential element for allowing us to survive as humans, as Jews, throughout thousands of years. And so even though it comes every week, we should never take it for granted. It has been our protector as much as we have been protector of it. All right, so let's look at this a little bit more in detail. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et haShabbat. Children of Israel are to keep Shabbat. That is the commandment. Keep Shabbat. What does that mean? La'asot et haShabbat ledorotam berit olam. They should make the Shabbat for their generations as an eternal covenant. A covenant, again, is an open-ended contract of mutual expectation. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael. Between me and the children of Israel, ot hi leolam. It is a sign forever. Signs in Hebrew is a very powerful concept. It means that the same way that the ring on my finger is a sign of my marriage, Shabbat is a sign of the covenant between us and God. I know it's not a physical sign. You can't reach out and grab Shabbat, but that space in time is a sign. It is a way of being in the world that powerfully demonstrates our allegiance to the covenant and the benefit of that covenant when we actually take Shabbat off and embrace it properly. That is an amazing gift. And then we get a little bit more justification. Because for 6 days, God made the heavens and the earth. Uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash. But on the 7th day, he ceased and paused for breath, was re-ensouled, had additional spirit. Vayinafash is hard to capture in English because the word nefesh, from which this word comes from, that root, can mean breath. So it could just be like catching your breath, which certainly Shabbat can do for us. It can also mean, however, your being. On Shabbat, you can meet yourself in a way that you can't while you're chasing after all of your obligations during the week. Who are you when you're not doing things? Who are you when you sit still and you allow yourself to catch up to you? And it can also mean more of that nefesh, that soul. There is an extra element to our soul that is able to give us a certain aspect of life on Shabbat. The veil between us and God becomes thinner on Shabbat, if you will. Okay, so there's a number of different song melodies for this. Let's go ahead and do the one that is most famous, which has a lot of repeating, which we're not doing because of time. So in between each of the final 3 lines, we would go back to the beginning, but we're not going to do that today for the sake of time. So watching this as you're recording, just insert the first 2 lines after all the other lines. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam beini uvein b'nei Yisrael ot hi leolam ot hi leolam ot hi leolam. Bum, 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 and we go back, and then we continue. Hi sheshet yamim asa Adonai, et hashamayim v'et haaretz bum, 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 and we go back, and then we continue. Uvayom hashvihi, Shabbat vayinapash, Shabbat vayinapash, Shabbat vayinapash. And we go back one more time. I should point out as well that Vishamru is customarily said while standing, as we are almost testifying, if you will, in a court sense, that we are swearing, yes, we are testifying that God is our God and that Shabbat is a symbol of the bond between us. That is how serious it is taken. All right, I realized I forgot to tell you what page we're on, but it looks like you all caught up. We're on page 46 in Lev Shalem. And the next thing we would do is the Chatzi Kaddish. Now, we've already talked about the Chatzi Kaddish in its translation when we did the Musaf section. So if you're just joining us now, go back and watch the recording on YouTube. But there is a special melody that we do for the Shabbat Chatzi Kaddish. So we will go ahead and practice that. Yit Gadol v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabba. Remember, if you're not leading, say Amen after those 4 words. Ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayehon u'vyomechon u'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala ba'agala ובזמן קריב והימרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם לעלמי עלמיה. Congregation can continue. Yitbarach, and then the leader continues. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitromam v'yitnacheh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalah shemei dekudesha rifu leila mimpo bechata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma ve'himeru amen. All right, at that point, we continue with the Amidah. Now, the Amidah for any evening service is done privately. Unlike in the morning or in the afternoon or Musaf service, we do this completely privately. Now, privately means that we can use the words of the text to inspire and dislodge our own thoughts from within us. And it doesn't have to be done to any particular melody. It doesn't have to be done at any particular speed. That's why you've probably heard me say 1,000 times, please continue at your own pace. It's one of my catchphrases. So this is recited privately between pages 47 and 52. You'll notice that page 47 begins with Avot, just like we had for when we did Musa. Page 48 picks up with Givurot, just like we did when we did Musa. And then at the very top of page 49, we have the Kedusha, the very short version, the single prayer version, because it is not done out loud with the group. And so we don't have the famous Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh line. Instead, we get 2 sentences to summarize God's holiness. Then in the middle of page 49, we go into our reflections on Friday night, Shabbat's essence. And then we pick up on page 50 with 2 prayers, and page 51 with 1 more, Shalom Rav. And those 3 are also found in the morning, afternoon, and Musaf services, although Shalom Rav is done, or Sim Shalom is done during the morning service, Shalom Rav for the others. So we get a little variety for how we want to talk about peace because of the various customs that have developed. Okay, but we're not going over those because that is private prayer, and we are focused in this class on what we do out loud. So let's turn to page 53 and talk about our semi-repetition. So if you come to a service on a morning, afternoon, or Musaf, it is classically found that the Amidah will be recited 100% privately. And then once we feel that most people have finished, the Chazan, the cantor, or the leader, the Shliach Tzibor, will then begin the Amidah from the very beginning and go all the way through and we will do the Kedusha all together at that point, and then people will be able to listen and say Amen for the rest of the service. And that way, even if they couldn't pray for themselves, they at least get to hear it. Now, nowadays, when we all have a copy of the Siddur in our hands, and we have pretty much universal literacy in at least one of its languages, it is not felt as necessary to do that full repetition, which was important when people didn't have copies of the book in their hand, because books were really, really expensive. But if you don't understand that that repetition would normally happen, then you're not going to understand why we're doing a version of it on Friday night. Because on most evenings, we don't do any repetition at all. Like I said, the Amidah is done privately. There's no fancy Kedusha. You just do the Amidah. And in the old world, prior to a lot of additions, Aleinu creeping in, when you finish the Amidah, you were done. So because people were praying at their own pace, they would have finished the Chatzi Kaddish, said Amen to the leader. They would have launched themselves into their Amidah, Baruch Atah Adonai, or whichever melody they were using. And when they finished, and they did, their little 3 steps back, they would head for the door. Right? I mean, it's Friday night. It's like a Tuesday night. You've been working all day. You've come together with the community to pray, but it's a short service on an average, like weekday evening service. It's 15 minutes, maybe even 10 in the ancient world where it was a much, much shorter service because they didn't have all the embellishments that we have. So you do your davening and then you go, right? What are we sticking around for? There's nothing else. And you need to go home and be with your family or go to bed, depending upon what time of year it is. So yeah. Well, on Shabbat, we don't want to let people walk. Right? No one should walk home alone. On Shabbat, when we finish, we deliberately pad the service with additional material that is not required in order that someone who came late can do their Amidah and still finish with us, and then we can walk home all together. Right? No one should be walking the streets alone on Friday night. Yeah, you have to rush, and no one has the extra time on a regular weeknight. On Friday, what are you doing? Rushing home to do the laundry? Stick around, go home when other people leave as well. You can hang out for a few more minutes. And so we added in a set of readings that incorporate the themes of the Amidah that we just did privately, but do it in a way that kills some time so that the people who came late can catch up. Right? At the end of the week, we let everyone catch up. It's a very important concept. We call it the rat race out there for a reason. And people often feel like they are running, and they often feel like they're falling further and further behind. On Shabbat, we can wait an extra 10 minutes for people to catch up. They were running late because of whatever problem they had in their life, their work, their farm. We can wait a few more minutes. Finish your Amidah. We will leave and lock up the building together. So this is a very powerful statement of community, and it is also a nice way of trying to introduce some of the themes of the Friday night Amidah. And of course, historically, for people who didn't have their own copy, it would have been very important for them to learn some of those elements. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing great. All right, so it begins with Vayachulu. Vayachulu is taken from chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. I'm sorry, we're on page 53. And it is a statement about the importance of Shabbat. Jewishly, we're kind of miffed at the chapter breaks that our Torah has, because we didn't write the chapter breaks. The chapters were written by Christian scholars during the Middle Ages, primarily as a way to have a common reference system when they wanted to argue with us, that is to say, drag us out into public to argue, not that it was our choice. Ramban, Nachmanides' disputation, is the most famous incident of that. If you've never seen the film or read the books, please, it's a great statement of what it's like to stand up for our people when you know you're going to lose, even if you win. But, so Vayachulu, it comes from chapter 2, but really it is the end of chapter 1, because Shabbat is the end of creation. It's not an afterthought. We saw back in Lachadodi, Shabbat is the reason for creation. It's not an after idea. So what does it say? Vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tziva'am. The heavens and the earth were finished, and all of their hosts, meaning all of the myriad of things that live in the world. Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i melachto asher asa. And so God ended on the 7th day all of his work that he had done. Vayishbot. We saw this in Beshamru, and I meant to mention it, but we'll do it here. The word Shabbat is not a proper noun. It's actually based off a root meaning to stop, to cease. So Vayishbot, and God ceased on that day. God went on strike. God is calling it quits for a day. And that's why Shabbat literally means cessation. It's not just the proper name for that day of the week. It is a verb telling you stop. Vayishtot bayom hashvi'i, and he rested or he ceased on that seventh day. Mikol malachto asher asa, from all the work that we've done. Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i v'kadesh oto, and God blessed that seventh day, and he made it holy, he sanctified it. Kivo shavat mikol malachto, because on that seventh day he rested, he ceased from all of his work. Asher bara Elohim la'aseh, that God had created and done and performed. So it's an incredibly powerful statement that Shabbat was made holy because of what God didn't do on that day. And the other 6 days of the week were special because of what God did. Shabbat is special and even more special because of what God didn't do on that day.
Where did it come from?
So perform, this translation, because sometimes I translate it myself, sometimes I borrow other translations. This particular translation was borrowed. Perform is la'asot, to do or to make. So it's going into the word perform. You'll often find many translations like to use fancier vocabulary than necessary, because otherwise, I think they get paid by the letter. They want to show off that their SAT verbal scores. So yeah, I could have just as easily said that which God had created and done.
That's about which created also
So, I mean, literally, it is to do. It's an infinitive verb.
you were made.
Do or make. Yeah, exactly. Well, again, trying to capture a foreign word into English is just always going to be tricky. So, is there a difference between do, make, and perform? Well, in English, there might be in different places. But does that mean by picking one or the other, we're 100% right on target for the Hebrew? This is why learning Hebrew is good. and getting out of that translation. Okay, so let's see if we can't at least do these two parts. Vayachulu often is sung as follows. Vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol sevam vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto hivo shavat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. All right, and then we continue, and that is also said standing, again, now giving testimony to the rest of the world that indeed God did create the world. And please don't get caught up in the whole young earth creationism debate. God creating the world could have happened 6,000 years ago. It could have happened 6 billion years ago. The important thing is that this place began. It hasn't just always been here, which is what many of the ancient Greeks and other philosophers believed, but that it had a start and that it was purposeful, it was intentional. But again, that goes to more theology than we have time for today. We then continue with the avot, and then it isn't. That is to say, it starts off like a regular avot, just like we did on our Musaf class, until it swerves. Because remember, we're not really doing a repetition; we're just doing kind of a repetition. So we're going to be the avot to start, and then we're going to swerve, and we're still going to, in the next page, include a lot of the themes that you would have seen in the Amidah, and the Vayachulu, for example, was also in that private Amidah that we did, but it's not exactly the same. So we would do it to the same melody as we do for our other Shabbat Amidot, but notice the last 3 words, Honei, Shamayim, Va'aretz, are different. They're a paraphrase of who possesses or who made the heaven and earth, rather than going into the longer version. So chant it, like I said, very much like we would do for any other service. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Onei Shamayim Va'aretz. And then we move on to Magin Avot. But we're not doing that tonight because that takes a whole lot of other explanation. Because Magin Avot is a paraphrase of the other themes of the Amidah. So if you look at it carefully, just dissect it line by line, and we'll look at it a little bit generally when we get back together next week. You'll see echoes of all the things we did between pages 47 and 52 privately. Like I said, it's a semi-repetition. And then the bottom line, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, is actually taken from the Amidah as being the normal blessing for Shabbat that we do in the middle of it. But we're in the home stretch. We will definitely finish Shabbat next week. And we might even have a little more time for questions and comments. Thank you all for coming, and for everybody on our Zoom call as well. Thanks for being there. And I need to find my toolbar. There we go. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Be well.